Okay. Good morning or good afternoon. I was going to say good morning. Well, I guess I just did. So we'll wait just a minute or two to give people time to jump on, and then I'll be back in just a second to introduce everybody. Give it a few more minutes. We have about 15 people on right now. We have about 30 plus registered. Not sure that everybody will be here today, but we're glad that those of you who are here are here. Thanks. It's kind of awkward to watch the little timer. So okay, so it's about 12:01 and I will go ahead and get started. We are recording. So hi, everybody. Welcome to PRSA St. Louis, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Nez Savala, APR. I am the programming co-chair this year. My day job is St. Louis. I work for St. Louis Community College as the communications manager. And with us behind the scenes is Reagan Johnson, PhD. She is the programming co-chair for PRSA St. Louis this year, and she works for Spire Energy as the public communications manager. So thank you to Reagan for operating behind the scenes. This is our first official webinar for 2022. So again, thank you for being here. And I am the kind of person who doesn't like to give super long introductions. I'd like to let the panelists tell their own story. So today you are here for both sides of crisis management with our presenter, Denise Bentele, APR. She is the president, CEO, and founder of Common Ground Public Relations in St. Louis. And just before we get started, I want to remind you of a few things, that we are in listen and view mode. So what that means is that all of you out there can see us, but we can't see you. We'd also like you to use the Q&A and the chat function for your questions. And you are welcome to ask questions during the presentation. We will take time to answer those questions, pauses and things like that. So you don't have to wait till the end if you have a question. We are recording this session, and it will be linked to the PRSA chapter's YouTube page. So you can find it later on if you want to go back and look at it. And then real quick, before we get too deep into everything, please mark your calendars for April 13th at 1 o'clock. We will have another webinar, and that webinar will be titled Connecting with Community Publications. And the focus is the best way for PR professionals to connect and engage with supporting local publications. We have confirmed at least one publication, the St. Louis American, and we're working on some others. So again, mark your calendars for April 13th at 1 o'clock. More details to come. And because April is APR month, Accreditation in Public Relations, we will also host an APR session for people who might be interested in learning a little bit more about pursuing their APR. So enough of me. I'm going to turn it over to Denise Bentele, and we will get started.
Thank you. Thanks, Nez. I really appreciate it. Thank you to all of you out there who I cannot see, but I really do mean it. If you do have questions, please, as I go through our talk today, please push them through the chat, and I'll try and keep an eye on that, or Reagan will holler at me to stop for a question. I have designed our time together to be really conversational. I know we all are kind of tired of Zooms, but in particular, hearing a voice on a Zoom while looking at a slide is sometimes even harder. So I am going to talk through my experience, give you some of the background of things I've seen. And I sort of have themed this talk today. We all on Instagram, you'll see people will post Instagram versus reality. So what something looks like with all the polish and shine. and then what it looks like really behind the scenes. And so that's what I've done with my talk today is textbook versus reality. So those of us who particularly have taken the time to get our APR, which I highly recommend you do if you meet the qualifications. So please, I would take advantage of what the chapter will offer you next month. But this is happens to be the 11th edition of Public Relations Strategies and Tactics. I had to borrow it from Jenna here in the office because I don't know where mine is, but there's a lot of great learnings about crisis management, and they all sound great on paper. But when it comes to the rubber meeting the road, it's just interesting how things will play out. So you want to stick to the rules, but also I think there's a lot to be learned in understanding where things will go wrong, what it looks like when they go wrong, why you want to try and follow the rules as best as possible so that they don't, but also then maybe how to get yourself out or around the difficult situation. So I thought maybe I could build on what Nez was giving you by way of my background to let you know some more specifics about my crisis background, and then we can go from there. I, like a lot of you, have a journalism degree from Mizzou, and thought I was going to maybe be an international correspondent or something like that. But I really got bit by the public relations bug. When I was in college, I worked as an intern at Fleischman, and then ultimately moved on to a career at Amico on their North American Crisis Communications team. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then back to Fleischman, ultimately back to St. Louis, and then a few other moves, but then here at Common Ground, which is now 19 years old. For those of you who know me, it's kind of amazing to believe that we've made it this far, and how many things can happen in 19 years. And that is the part of the title of the presentation, as Nez said, both sides of crisis. This firm has had to face our own crisis in the last few years. So I'll talk about some of the learnings from that as well. So I would tell you that some of the attributes I think of a good crisis counselor come from having really good advisors around you, and also learning boundaries of business, of ethics, understanding what to ask and what to push for. I started to learn those things at a very young age. I am lucky. My father was a corporate executive, and so I learned a lot just growing up in that environment, hearing about mergers, acquisitions, failed mergers and acquisitions, different kinds of things, particularly within the chemical industry, which was his industry. So a lot of what you learn to be a good crisis counselor, I think, comes from just being really open and being kind of a citizen of the universe, if you will. So moving on to then that corporate experience that I mentioned a minute ago. So I started with Amico in Chicago. They are now BP and trying to be Amico again. Those of us in St. Louis, of course, know Amico well because of the big sign at Cosland. But I joined their communications team, was a member of their North American Crisis Communications team. There were probably 6 of us that back in the day, we were pagers and had to be ready to go. And we were ready to go because of a lot of preparedness. The corporate chemical and oil and gas industries used a formal shared curriculum at the time called Supervoice. So we were all trained in how to identify and handle the communications responsibilities on site of a crisis. And a lot of what I learned then really holds true to today. One of the things that we learned and had to follow was certainly identify first the most official, senior most official person on site. That's usually in the case of an oil and gas situation, somebody in a first responder situation, maybe a fire department or Department of Transportation or something like that. So that carries through to a lot of corporate work. Identify your most senior person and then determine exactly what happened. This sounds obvious, but it's amazing how quickly you lose control of the situation when the precise details of what happened get lost or are not captured soon enough. Third, we had something in Amico called an if asked statement, and essentially it's a Q&A, but an if asked. So developing the essential questions and answers that would be anticipated in media response. And it's interesting, side note on a client a few years ago, we helped them with a big grand opening in St. Louis. And we were on our first couple conference calls with them. And they were using a term none of us had heard before. So we had to kind of fake it until we could figure it out, which I know some of us have to do quite often. But they kept saying must airs, our must airs. We're like, what are these saying? Finally, we figured it out, must air. So like for them, these were essential messages that must get out. So whether you call it an if-ask statement, a Q&A, or your must airs, you definitely will have some form of statement making being a part of your response. And after all that training, and I'll get into a lot more of that type of information in a minute, but after all that training, I was 24 years old, first position, and sure enough, that pager, that beeper went off one weekend, and I was scared to death. I was 24, and I was going to go represent one of the Fortune 12 companies in the world at a ruptured gasoline pipeline that was rapidly creating a pretty significant environmental issue. Ironically, it was here in Missouri, so I had to fly home on the first flight. I had my essential emergency materials with me, showed up, found my most senior person, introduced myself. I'm sure he thought, oh crap, who have they sent to help with the situation? But I had my training under my belt and that preparedness, and I ended up representing the company well. I was able to handle the situation. When I got back to Chicago, as all rule followers, they were really pleased with how I had implemented what was an industry standard. So I tell that story only because there is a formula to crisis. It doesn't always unfold the way we want it to, but preparedness is certainly one of the most important things we can use in our arsenal to be prepared. There's so many different types of crises, but again, to give you an idea of the various kinds I personally have worked on, and this is a little bit of a list, so forgive me, but I want this to inform any questions you might have, because I know people on the call, that we've got people in education, higher education, schools, school districts, consumer products, utilities. So a number of my areas of experience here might be of interest. So on environmental issues, I worked, as I mentioned, in oil and gas and petroleum. I've worked on international lead related issues, other hazardous materials, and healthcare. We've had murder, otherwise called euthanasia sometimes, depending on the environment, medical malpractice, managed care crises, certain number of business crises and issues related to bankruptcy, employee and retiree issues, failed mergers and acquisitions, employee conduct and misconduct. That was the genesis of the crisis that Common Ground faced. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. I've worked on union organization efforts and strikes. I've worked in food safety related to retail delivery and franchise contract arguments and related issues, biotechnology issues. And then on the public affairs side, there's coalition building, ballot initiatives, grassroots work around crises and changing legislation, and then certainly in the community, police issues and protests. So I've seen a lot of different environments. So hopefully that will help fuel some of the questions that you all might have as we go through today's talk. And they take different shapes and sizes. There are a lot of different flavors to crises. So certainly there's the immediate, and we think about an immediate crisis, something like an accident or something that's threatening immediately. But there's also the long-term chronic kind of crisis that really can damage reputation over time. Often crises, and a lot of those that I just referenced, are really business issues. It's business conduct, business practice. And then, like I said, there's also the life, death, or environmental. So they come in all shapes and sizes, and being prepared looks the same across the board. But having your act together is really important. Being prepared for crisis. But in my experience, preparedness before the crisis is essential. And this is really the bread and butter of what we as public relations professionals do. And I cannot stress it enough that to really be prepared for a crisis, means you really need to have a strong reputation. The way to have a strong reputation, of course, is to do the bread and butter of what we all as professional public relations counselors do day in and day out for our clients. This is thought leadership for our executives. This is monitoring and managing employee satisfaction and having strong employee communications programs, having strong legislative and public affairs arms or divisions of our organizations, really living up to our promises, telling our stories, being well-rounded, and really earning the reputation and awareness that we can help establish our ability to do business. I like to say, if we don't own our business, we can really lose our ability to do our business. So taking the time ahead of time to really be thorough and really lead our executives to understand the importance of ongoing reputation management and building is absolutely the best tonic for when a crisis happens, because almost any organization will face one sooner or later of some size or style. But when we have ambassadors, we have friends, we have people who trust us, when the media go on Google to see, well, I've never heard of this organization, let me go look them up. When they can start to see that this organization has a footprint of doing good business and has good Google reviews and doesn't have a long history of frustrated former employees, it's harder for them to build a case to damage our organization's reputations for very long. So I think really managing that is important, and it's really helps us increase the validity of what we do and really earn our seat at the table. So really keep that in mind. No executive likes to be in trouble. So the more they invest in building that reputation over time can really help them. Because when they lose their ability to do their business and they don't manage their reputation, you see things like legislative control, mandates, even bans, higher taxes, fines. So there is a direct financial repercussion for not managing the reputation and not being prepared for crises. And you have to really be authentic with your brand and make sure you really build that reputation to warrant the support that you might need in the face of a crisis. I'll use one example. So you all might remember the Fairlife milk brand. It went through a very difficult crisis a few years ago when their whole brand was about happy cows. They talked about happy cows and made that part of their higher price point, that Fairlife milk was worth buying because our whole from cow to carton, we had happier cows, we had a better process, et cetera. And then it turned out, unfortunately, one of their largest farms, there was a viral video about the cows being abused. This really damaged their reputation. It continues to linger on social media and on the internet because it was so counter to what their brand represented. So they weren't really authentic in the first place, which made it really harder and still lingers to this day for them to kind of shake this reputation. Their response is kind of textbook. They've done a really good job of changing their position, of getting rid of that dairy, of really owning the issue and being better advocates for animal welfare. But it still shows the impact of not really owning the reputation you're claiming to have in the first place, and what can happen then when you get caught, maybe, or something bad happens, or there's a bad actor. That particular crisis also points out something else that we're seeing increasingly in the modern era with crisis, and that is the cascade effect of controversy. If we were all in the room, I would ask you what we're kind of calling that right now, but that's cancel culture, right? This cascade effect of controversy means the stores couldn't carry Fairlife milk for a while. The employees had a hard time saying where they worked. There's this ripple effect of we can't be near that. So it's not only your organization, it's any of the organizations you need around you to stay in business if you don't manage your reputation and are prepared to survive a crisis. So can't say enough about preparedness and protecting that hard-earned reputation. You need to then be prepared for crisis. And so as I promised you, textbook versus Instagram, or Instagram versus reality, textbook versus reality. In the textbook, it talks about 89% of CEOs expect a crisis. yet more than 50% of them don't have a plan for said crisis. So I think there's probably a lot of fear. If we plan for it, how can we plan for every eventuality? What does a plan look like? We already have an operations plan. A lot of companies have an incident plan, and that's not at all what a communications plan needs to be. I've been doing this long enough. I remember back in the day where we had crisis plans that were full binders, and they were binders on shelves, and they lived on a server somewhere, and they were very complicated. Thankfully, we've graduated to something far more simple and impactful. So your modern crisis plan is really nothing more than an approved process and agreement among decision makers for how we'll handle the crisis. And it's amazing how simple that sounds, but how complicated and important it can be. So I'm going to pause for a second. Reagan, do we have a question?
Yes, we do have a question, Denise. It comes from Edward Bryant. He said, can you provide some advice, initial steps on creating a crisis communications plan for an organization that does not have one?
Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly where I'm headed next in this next section. So what is a plan? What needs to be in that plan, particularly if you don't have one? So in the modern era, a plan can be very simple, and it really should be an approved process and help facilitate agreement among decision makers for how they will handle that crisis. And so what we look to do when we create these plans is, one, do some pre-work. And that pre-work will include this whole section of org charts, contact lists, our audiences, how we reach those audiences, company fact sheets, and specific details, everything that we should know about an organization. So our operating facilities, how we screen employees, some of our practices, our employment practices, our training practices, OSHA health and safety practices, when buildings were built. You know, if we think about the tornadoes in Illinois a few months ago, answers so that you can answer questions like, when was a building last inspected? What was the building made of? And so some of those essential things that we should know about our bricks and mortar, that we should know about our hiring practices, and that we should know about our training practices, things like that should be compiled and captured and regularly updated, maybe once a year, so that you have the right number of approximate employees in a given building or that sort of thing. A really good example of this in failure is several years ago, a company called Praxair. Some of us might remember Praxair had a large facility down near Jefferson and Choteau. It was one of their largest tank holding facilities in the nation. And Praxair is a gas company, so gas in containers, if you will. So they had a major explosion at the facility, and their spokesperson was in, I think, New Jersey. And that night on Channel 5, trying to watch Mike Bush try and interview her remotely, she didn't have any of this obvious information, did not know how long Praxair had on this facility, did not know what kind of gases were on the facility, did not know how many employees worked at that facility, et cetera. It was really a crisis interview failure. There, in my opinion, particularly having come out of oil and gas, there was absolutely no excuse for them not having that information available to that corporate spokesperson. Because there's a lot she can say she doesn't know, but man, to know nothing about anything is really hard to swallow. So that's an example of the importance of having that ready reference. So there's ready reference parts of a crisis plan. And then there are the decision team. So we like to confirm with the client who is on the decision team. And usually I recommend 2 branches to the decision team. One is really 3, I guess. One is at the most top level, the key decision makers. These will be operational people, probably an attorney, and then certainly the lead communications person. So it could be a senior VP of communications or whatnot, an ops person, maybe the president of the company, and then, like I said, maybe a legal team. So those people are deciding what we're doing, how we're remedying the situation, what we're saying. So they're the senior most group of people that need to be convened in making decisions. And in our crisis plans, the Common Ground Rights, we create this chart for every specific organization. Anyway, and then it breaks off into two. One team is just ops, and that's what they should be doing. They should be focused on the situation, taking care of the people, taking care of the plant, taking care of the neighborhood, whatever has happened. The other team breaks down, and they're the communications team. And we get very specific in our communications plans. That team will have maybe 6 team members, and every position on that team doesn't necessarily have a name against it, because who knows if Jane's on vacation that week. And so there's no sense in putting her name in that slot if she's not going to be there. So those 6 positions have a specific set of responsibilities. So comms person 1, comms person 2, comms person 3, so that in the event of a crisis, I'm able to say, Nez, you're 1, Denise, you're 2, Reagan, you're 3. And that means Nez knows she's doing messaging, Reagan knows she's doing social media. So there's no question about like, well, what do you want me to do, or what should I go do? We've already covered it. It's in the plan. If you're 1, that's what you're doing. If you're 3, that's what you're doing. And so that's what I mean about the importance of preparedness. I'm not saying that I know what's going to happen or what's going to explode or where the leak is going to be. We don't prepare necessarily for the eventuality. We prepare for how the team will function regardless of the eventuality. So that's almost the most important thing I can say about creating a plan. Just a few more examples, like for healthcare clients and higher ed clients, we'll talk about, maybe the history on given issues, employee background, do we do background checks, dorms, how many rooms are in a dorm, when was that dorm built, that sort of thing. So, we'll have information ready to go on a lot of information that we really should have at our fingertips, not knowing whether it might be an act of God that happens or something else. So kind of thinking through being prepared for those questions. And then we help that decision team that I talked about, we help them be ready in the moment because they're going to be stressed. So your communications plan should have checklists for them. They're like agendas. So the textbook versus reality. The textbook had a really cute name for this, something like conflict management life cycle. I don't call it that. I call it a decision team checklist. But we basically help them think through, is this a reactive situation or do we need to be proactive? And what are the decisions that trigger one or the other? Should be pretty obvious things like, is human life at risk? Do we have neighborhoods at risk? Are media likely to be interested? How significant is this issue for us to become more proactive, given a situation? So we create those checklists, those questions to ask themselves. We include lists of key audiences. So in the event of a crisis and they're stressed, that they don't forget an entire audience of people. And it's amazing how that can happen under stress. So it's important to think it through. Who's everybody that could be affected? And then that way they can just cross them off and say, only these 3 groups are affected. Let's communicate directly with them. So again, just doing the pre-work so that in the moment, their thought processes can be really clear. Also in a crisis plan, the third area is what will be our process for communicating. So establish who will handle which channel, and then as quickly as possible communicate to the public that the expectation is that they will receive information from us on XYZ channel, or maybe you're working with first responders. The expectation should be that I see a question about lawyers. I'm going to get to lawyers in just a second. It's a great question. We want to make sure that we're accessible and that they know where they're going to get information. One of the biggest failures, we all see this when we follow a crisis, is how quickly people get off the rails. They're making assumptions because they're not hearing anything out of a crisis. There's not any one single ownership of letting the public know what they should expect. In my opinion, I think the police and fire, the public information officers are getting far better at this. I've seen them actually say at the scene of an incident to specifically, follow them, or they'll say when the next news conference will be, or we will have an update in 30 minutes on this social channel, or what have you. So they're being really good about trying to stop that rumor mill that starts all too quickly. So be accessible, be timely, and having those channels set ahead of time can be really helpful in saving even just a few moments. The fourth section in a good plan is we need to have administrative credentials for every platform, particularly in your very large organizations. Your social managers are sometimes in a totally different team than where the people leading crisis might be. And there's some very good direction from one, either we need the credentials and we need to have the social managers be a part of the crisis team. In some organizations, depending on their business, we are recommending that we in fact assume all those channels. Whoever's normally managing social will not be handling social during that crisis. So we definitely want to assume the channels. You want to have the ability to turn off preloaded content. You know, it's embarrassing. A bad thing happens and then all of a sudden we're running a BOGO offer next Tuesday on whatever the product is. So you don't want to embarrass yourself by having preloaded content or advertising campaigns running when an organization is facing something serious. So that's another really important thing to have in your plan, is the ability to stop and redirect social and what it might be traditional marketing, just so that you are paying attention. So you set in place things like social listening too. You really want to be paying attention to what people are saying as well. So those are the four main, really essential parts. Each one of those has multiple documents, tabs, fact sheets underneath them, but that's how you create a modern communications plan. Any questions? I'll pause for just a second. Any questions on the planning process? I'll give you just a second. I'm taking a drink of water. Looks good. I will get to lawyers again in a second. So the second part of creating a, oh, I'm sorry, one thing, let me see.
Just a loving comment. Great points thus far. Preparedness is key.
Awesome. And the question about it, can't quite get it. Let media know they should
So
only
it says, one thing I learned is to let media know they should only take the crisis info from one or two people and give them those names. They've had people calling in pretending to be from an organization and lying about who they are and giving false information.
Yeah.
So 2 comments. Yeah, really good comments.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point I was making before about the public information officers. They know that this issue is happening too, and so the more we can own the channel and say we, and or sometimes it's a first responding organization, you know, sometimes it is the police or fire or whatnot, but the more we collectively make certain that the public and the media know who is giving valid information, the better off we are. And certainly to prepare your organization, this is kind of down in the weeds, but we also have in our crisis plans always with clients to make sure anybody who mans an 800 number is at the front desk of any of your facilities. They all need to know. It's kind of funny. You're at the highest level of managing the crisis, and then you're at the total front line with a whole bunch of people in between. But at the front line, those folks really need to know that something's happening. And they don't need to answer questions, but they need to triage questions and be prepared that there might be a news crew outside, and how to alert properly within the organization and kind of handle that situation. So that's another important point too, so that they aren't caught off guard, feeling like they need to answer someone's question.
We also had a comment, great point about marketing. Too often marketing and sales wants to keep doing business as usual. So wanted to share that comment.
And that goes again back to that early planning with those decision makers. When we work with an organization, I asked them in one of my first crisis interviews with them, what is your philosophy? When this happens, what is your corporate philosophy going to be about handling a crisis? And that's when you have those conversations like, we understand we're not going to keep marketing as usual, right? Or some situations dictate that we can't do that, right? So you sort of bring them along and educate them why those things are important. But it's really valuable to have, it's essential to have that kind of upfront interview with corporate leadership to lay the land for how we'll create this crisis plan. So continuing on with preparedness, then it's building on that plan. Now we want to get into training. Really want to make sure that our leadership and our potential spokespeople are ready. So even going back to the Amico days I was talking about before, you also had to be prepared to be a spokesperson. And you had, so like in my case, 24-year-old, newbie on the team, I had to be as prepared as a corporate executive because in that situation, our line of business there very well could happen. That's who was going to be speaking for the company on the ground in any given moment. So the rules of interview preparedness and training apply here, and they're very important. You don't just write that plan and put it on a shelf. We have to practice with those executives on how to be able to handle challenge questions, how to handle an interview, how to navigate sharing what they do know, what they don't know, what they're going to know. And this is where attorneys certainly get involved. They really don't want us to say much, and for good reason. I found some of the best crises I've worked on, we worked hand in glove with the attorneys. I think it's really important to create an understanding and a mutual respect with them. And again, this comes from that corporate philosophy. If the CEO says it matters, then she will tell the attorneys, this matters to me and our brand. You have to work with the comms team to make this right. And if we have that conversation today, rather than in the midst of crisis in 18 months, we're going to be in far better shape. Again, it's corporate philosophy that will drive that. If corporate philosophy is hell no, I'm not talking, we're doing a written statement and it has to be approved by the attorneys, then that's their corporate philosophy. Obviously you counsel and try and guide around some of the situations, but some organizations simply have to, maybe for compliance reasons or whatnot. And I worked in those situations where sometimes it is a 2-sentence statement and that is it. And there's a very good reason behind it. And so I think the more we respect and understand the law and the more lawyers respect and understand the repercussions, maybe for the communications perspective and what public sentiment might be impacted because of that, the better. So again, that's all part of that early prep. You want those attorneys on this crisis planning process so that you're better able to work together. Another note about attorneys and the law, I find this increasingly important and timely for this conversation, because this just has happened in the last few weeks. So with clients, obviously, as we go through training and interview training, I'm sure y'all have done this, we create Q&A and we practice. Here's our practice questions and answer document for challenge questions that our organization might face. These are often ultimately in the crisis plan, or that Q&A can get maybe shared with staff in any number of ways. I have often, with our clients, with their crisis plans, asked that the plan be used or marked, categorized as attorney privileged material, so that I'll actually work with the legal team so that the document can have that privilege. Because the fact that you plan for a potential bad happening to one of your customers could potentially be used against your organization, that you knew this could happen. Why didn't you stop it from happening if you knew it could happen? And so I think it's important that you try and get your crisis planning documents protected under attorney-client privilege, which means you're working hand in glove with the attorneys and it ultimately becomes their work product. I have seen, so I saw just in the last few weeks, the Post-Dispatch wrote a story about an organization. I won't name them here, but they, in the course of the story, the reporter used what I feel, and I'm super curious when he says I'll find out, but the reporter in the story says something like, in the employee handbook, there's a hypothetical question, and then this proposed, what our answer would be for this hypothetical question. The Post-Dispatch reporter took that question, put it in her story, and the context is clear that they it's really hard without giving all the details. She makes a very strong implication that the organization is in fact doing the bad thing that they had a challenge question written about. So the fact, I just can't stress enough how important it is to be careful with these documents and be careful where they go, and maybe even cloak them under attorney-client privilege, like I said, because these Q&As can be used to make it seem like, well, you knew this bad thing could happen, or, well, aren't you doing this bad thing? Because even you in your training materials to your employees reference this bad thing. Let me know if that doesn't make sense. I can revisit it. Like I said, I'm just trying to protect the identity of the organization. But you get the point. The closer we work with attorneys, I think the better off the client is going to be, and that's really what matters. So do include them in the process. We kind of conclude all of that with some group review and mock drills in some cases. So let's role play this. Let's run this out. Some organizations, particularly because of compliance, have to. They'll do full-scale drills. Other ones will just do like a table read, right? Gather around and kind of go through a document together and make sure that they understand what the rules would be and what it would feel like and what the decisions would be. So I'll pause again real quick. Any questions then on planning or that training point and why it's so important to make sure your key people can be spokespeople and know how to deal with challenge questions? Looks good. Okay. So quick overview then of where we are. Readiness is super important, and that's the pre-work. This is your reputation. This is being authentic. This is earning your ability, frankly, to make a mistake. Organizations make a mistake because organizations are made of people, and people make mistakes, whether they intend to or not. So being an authentic and organization having earned a strong reputation will serve you well over time. Your relevance can really help you too. People tend to forgive you if they really need what you have, and if you're responsive and seem to be a responsible organization about this. This is particularly for those organizations that deal in environmental issues that are kind of ugly. We don't love them, but we all use them. So I'll use like the lead industry and the work I've done in lead or in oil and gas. We all use gasoline to fuel our cars. We use lead. Every one of us right now is using lead. It's in our phones, it's on our computer screens, it's on the TV screens. And it's just not pretty, unfortunately, how we get lead and refine lead and then make it usable ingredient into so much of the modern technology. So being a relevant organization, owning improvements, being an industry that is better decade after decade, takes new science and improves its practice, helps deal with situations that are ugly when they go wrong. But being relevant and being authentic and being responsible shepherds of that product, in this case, referring to lead or maybe oil and gas or chemicals, helps survive the challenge because the public has to acknowledge that they in fact do need the product, and we're all part of that supply chain that is demanding something that maybe there was an accident with, oil spill or something. Again, they're ugly, but unfortunately the product itself is relevant. Okay, moving on, a little more textbook. So in the textbook, there's this really fun chart. In fact, I'll even show you a quick picture of it. It's this lovely, colorful, how to communicate in a crisis. And it has all these little headlines, and they're absolutely correct. But it's when the rubber meets the road that they take a different shape or maybe a different color. It's important to study that and learn it. You absolutely want your plan to reflect it, but you have to also have the gumption and the will and the grit to kind of survive what a crisis actually feels like when it's happening. There's a great quote in this book by Warren Buffett. He says, "Get it right, get it fast, get it out, and get it over." And he's right. That's a great way to distill what we all want in a crisis. Get it right, get it fast, get it out, and get it over. That seems so obvious, it's so clear, but as I said, textbook versus reality. So let's talk about some of the reality aspects. So I'm gonna talk about lawyers again. We need their counsel, and sometimes we have to follow their guidance. And so there are real legal threats, and that's why I reiterated before, they need to be part of the planning process. And then there are some crises that simply require a legal treatment of them, that legal end comes together. So for example, data breaches, they are required by law. If you've had a data breach, your public disclosure requirements are very specific. So that's the one kind of crisis that we need to follow what the law says we have to do in order to respond appropriately to that particular challenge. The reality of crisis also are new clients or organizations we haven't represented before. I'm obviously coming from an agency perspective. I think almost everybody on the call is inside an organization. So I would tell you, if you are inside an organization, just the importance of planning. And if you think you need external help in the event of a crisis, I would secure that relationship. You don't have to have it be a babysitting arrangement every day or every week or every year, but have an ongoing, establish some kind of a relationship with that external counsel. Because one thing I've learned in the last handful of years, we get phone calls a lot here. Can you help me with this crisis? And we've arrived at the decision, we almost won't take a new client who's in crisis. There are too many pitfalls. It's too risky for us. It's too risky for the public. I care a lot about the fact that we follow our ethical charge of being advocates for transparent information. I certainly work on behalf of my clients, but I want to honor the fact that they're best served by proper shepherding of fair and accurate information. And if I don't know an organization, it takes too much time for me to figure out whether they're telling me the truth or what has happened in order for us to really be good advisors. So it's important to really think that through and make sure you have the right team around you all the time going into a crisis. And the second part of what Warren Buffett says there is get it fast. Well, sometimes it's really hard to get it fast. You don't know what happened, particularly in far-flung enterprise. We don't know exactly where the information is or how to get it or how to trust it. So it's important, to the point we were all kind of agreeing on a few minutes ago, to establish the line of communication. It's more important today, with the speed of social media and everything, to establish a line of communication, even if you don't say very much. Even if you are saying, I don't know very much, I know these two things, but I can tell you I will come back here and this will be your most trusted source of information and I will share it as soon as I get it. I was watching a news conference the other day. Police information officer in New York City was talking about a crime. He didn't know very much at all, but he still took questions and he reiterated that. He said, I will come back to you with those answers. And actually, before he was even out of camera shot, somebody whispers in his ear one of his answers. He came right back in front of the camera and shared that answer. So it's really credible. Clearly, this guy is going to tell us what we need to know, even though they don't know much right now. So that's important. Getting it fast is valuable, even if you don't share very much. And I think that's one thing, again, that executives have always struggled with, is if they can't say everything and if they can't be 100% sure, then they don't want to say anything at all. And I think we all know, in the speed of social media and the rumor mill now, you can't really follow that old desire. So that's an important one. But if you do all that wrong, if you don't get it right, if you don't get it fast, if you don't get it out, and it sure as heck isn't going to get over. They're really strong examples. And I don't want to get too far into this one because it really could be a whole presentation all on its own. Nez and I know well some of the communications issues that happened around Ferguson in St. Louis when the shooting happened and Michael Brown died, and then the protests that followed. There's a lot of elements to that communications process in the first couple weeks that I think very few people actually know or understand. But a couple things that happened, and again, I know because I worked directly on it in the first few weeks, but not in the first few days. Nez called me, asked me a favor. I'll never forgive her. Teasing. It made for an incredible learning. You can't say no to Nez. That's why I'm here again today. Anyway, but it was too late, and there wasn't enough information, and it was too much water over the dam before trying to apply proper media relations protocols. And that's a great situation where it didn't get out right. It didn't get out fast. Some information that was valuable to the public didn't get out at all. And, you know, the goose was cooked before even the best practices. And I know I and my team tried to instill best practices just for setting up communications protocols. This is not about spinning anything. We tried to set up a media relations response mechanism, and it was like, I haven't even found the right metaphor for it. It was a snowball against a tsunami and I don't know what, but it was really, 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 really challenging. And I'll tell you though, a couple of things though that I did learn about it. One, about working with journalists, really challenging media. That was an incredibly challenging media time. And working with them peer to peer, they can be bullies. They try and run you over. And if your organization is in crisis, they think they taste blood. No, they often will lose their ethics. They are not kind. And that was a situation where, you know, you have some really tough conversations with journalists. But my point is to you today, you have the right to do that. I have said to entire networks, and I did then, you need to come at us with one request a day from all of your shows. If I get another set of phone calls from 8 different producers clamoring for 8 different shows, I will cut off your entire network. I'm not going to help. Other reporters, of course, you know, being again aggressive and taking off different tangents, not staying on what we were there to do. You know, personally attacking or trying to get information. The Washington Post was one example. All they wanted to know who I was. And I said to them over and over again, what can I do to help you? I'm here to help you get to the resources you need. How can I help you? So sometimes our job is to really toe that line. So I'm gonna take a quick break. I see a question.
Actually, it's a comment. It is from Crystal. It's important to say, I don't know, or have that information rather than to guess. It's difficult to train people who want to help and provide info to the media that it's okay to say, I don't know at this point, but I will get back to you, and then do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is definitely part of understanding and being confident enough to handle your role as a media manager in crisis. And sometimes it's, I don't know, but I will get it to you. And of course, you have to honor that promise. We can help them get what they need, but it's okay to push back. Kind of like I was just giving that analogy or that example a minute ago, letting them know you're here to help, but they got to follow some basic rules of combat. Otherwise, you know, nobody's going to get anything. It's just too hard if they can't help with the process. And I think frankly, we see more of that happening in incidents. Again, this is more about community related issues. I see organizations releasing information faster, whether that's body cam video or stores with video. I think the release of video is an example of, we don't know everything that happened, but these are the things we have. We've got this video, we've got this information, we've got this information. So start to release it and promise that you're going to come back with more. Again, just really important to own the channel. But if you don't get out there first, you might not get the chance ever to win that back or try and rein in that tsunami. And I will say, I did have a few very seasoned reporters say very nice things, complimentary of trying to understanding, trying to set up a process. So the process works when you can get it set up and when the media really want good information. They appreciate the fact that we're there to help them get it. So that's important. So here's another kind of crisis. So this is a long hauler. This is the kind of crisis that some organizations call like an acquired crisis. You bought into this, or you maybe you literally merged with an organization that has a separate crisis. I talked about lead before. This is another example. So working with Doe Run. I worked with the Doe Run company in Peru with their mining operation there. They acquired that mine and that operation from the Peruvian government. They had been operating it for, I think, 80 years at that time. And it was a frightful mess. I mean, they had terrible lead poisoning. They had a lot of things wrong with what was going on with that mine and that smelter. And this purchase meant a better future. But there was certain media and certain organizations that did not want to hear that. And so some of our organizations, we work in this environment. There are NGOs or other organizations that are never going to be our fan because of the industry we're in. And so how do you operate with that? Well, that's a different level of crisis. You're sort of in it for the long haul. You're constantly every year working on improving what you do, telling what you did, measuring how you did it, and just over and over and over and over again. And I don't know if you all remember Trip Frolickstein, who always he did media training and whatnot for a long time, passed away a few years ago. But Trip had a great chart of influencers from 1 to 10. Your 9s and 10s love you. Your 1 and 2s hate you. They're never going to like you. That is what it's like working sometimes in some of those industries where you're perpetually in crisis. You're always working to sustain your reputation, where you're probably never going to win your 1s and 2s, but you focus on mostly on your 3s to your 7s, because they're the ones who ultimately you can make a difference with those people. They can slowly migrate towards understanding what you're trying to communicate. So slow and steady wins that race, but it's like living in perpetual crisis. You've got to be a special kind of person to work in that environment for your whole career, for sure. I talked a moment ago about holding media to an equal standard. I really think this is an essential part of our job in crisis. You've got to be prepared to hold them accountable and to publish, and sometimes that means publishing your own information. Thankfully, we can do that now. We've got websites, we've got social media, we've got the ability to publish our own information and share it and counter what we're hearing with media. I've got a few different examples I wanted to share with you about how to do that, because it's sticky, particularly when you've got an aggressive, hateful reporter or outlet or throng of them. How do you manage them and win the day? So I'll start first with one of my favorites, because I actually won a silver anvil for this for PRSA. Oh, bye, Tiffany. Thanks for coming. Silver anvil several years ago for handling this crisis for the Sisters of Mercy health system. This was a reputational crisis. This was not a patient or health care related issue. This was technical. This was related to contracting and physician preferred provider lists and really boring managed care stuff. But it was ugly. And there was this little town in Arkansas when this was going on, and a few beloved local physicians were cut off this provider list. And I mean, that you would have thought it was a big deal. And it was locally, but I mean, people, they had, before we got involved, they had public meetings, done interviews, done radio talk shows, and every time it devolved into a total shitstorm. Name calling, yelling, people taking the microphone and not ever letting it go. The new CEO of the hospital there was a woman who had just come into the position, so she really didn't have any friends. She hadn't built her network yet. So it was kind of like everything that could be wrong was happening, was wrong. But every opportunity for public engagement was failing. So we went down there, we met with them, and this was kind of a guess, but it worked. I say a guess now because at the time, we really weren't sure if this would work, but we advised that, you know what, we're going to stop engaging in this way. And you have to know when to walk away sometimes. And this didn't mean that we were giving up on the fight. We were giving up on fighting and being, you don't have to attend every fight you're invited to. So in this case, we stopped the public meetings. There was another town hall the next week, and we just announced we were not going, but we announced we were not going in a very public way. We took out full page ads in the local newspaper that said we will not be attending this meeting, and here's why, which not healthy public discourse. You can reach us in all these other ways. All the rumors, we published a Q&A, an actual, myth, fact kind of document. We did direct mail to every homeowner in the area that was affected. We met with the ambassadors of the hospital, or the board members, and made them ambassadors to the community, because all the board members of the hospital were all the major employers. So through them, we gave them a new task. You have to help carry the water on this message, because the impact on what's happening has serious ramifications for people's access to healthcare and their insurance coverage and whatnot. We set up a free toll-free line. People could call and ask their direct questions to a real human being. Nobody's yelling, and they got their questions answered. And the whole thing was diffused in 4 weeks. It had been going on for 6 months. And ultimately, like I said, it was as direct and as simple as that was, it was highly effective. So sometimes you have to know when to walk away, and kind of cut the media off in doing so, and own your own channels. And that was before we even had very many channels compared to today with social media and everything else. So sometimes that's a strategy that you can employ. We've done that also in St. Louis here, had a major argument with United Healthcare, and the Post-Dispatch had picked a clear favorite in BJC. It was a big contracting dispute. There, our main tactic, aside from being very transparent, providing information, we didn't let that reporter keep playing the games they had been playing. They liked to call at 4:30 and then run a story at 5 saying a client was unavailable for comment. So we started calling her every morning at 9:30, asking her if she was going to need comment that day, and making sure she was not going to be able to keep reporting it that way. Every time there was an interview, we recorded it. And we sent that transcript back to her, or the notes of it, so that she knew we had what was said in the interview. And it quickly turned around. So sometimes you have to just really understand media. That's where the journalism school and having worked in the newsroom really does come into play in managing crisis. So that you can have that confidence, because it's nerve-wracking to take that hard line and convince your client that that's how you're going to do it. But sometimes it's the right thing to do, and it's the fair thing to do for your client to hold the media accountable. I liken it to horseback riding. Sometimes I don't know if any of you all ride horses, but I do. A horse knows when you're scared, and you have to be a confident rider. And when you work with a horse in a barn, sometimes you're just using your body to physically push that horse back into its stall or help get its saddle on. And I feel that way sometimes when I'm working in these tough situations with media. I'll give you one more great example that I've seen an organization handle crisis. This was a strike, major consumer product company with food product, and they had a Teamsters strike, which is like the worst one you can have. They're very powerful group of people, and this organization, my client, took all of it very seriously. The decision making, the communications, everything. They converted a whole large area of their first floor conference rooms into just a war room. We had everything we needed. We had food, we had water, we had Wi-Fi, we had electricity, we had tables, we had chairs, we had phones, we had fax machines. This is back in the day. It tells you how long ago it was. And we had access to the decision makers. They came down. They were down in our war room every hour, every couple hours, and were directly accessible to us to answer questions, help us write Q&A, respond to reporters in a timely fashion. They even had almost like an artist note taker. So, we had like whiteboard and sticky notes all over, and they were perpetually taking notes and evolving the crisis and the communications and how the decision making every day. It was the most well-managed on-site situation almost that I've ever been a part of. And it was because the leadership knew that they cared about communications as much as they did their operations. And having that really come together was really powerful. Certainly then, after all of it's over, you go into restoration mode. The textbook says it takes 3 years to restore your reputation after a crisis. I think in reality today, it could even be longer than that, given how long it takes to rebuild your reputation, have Google Analytics move those negative stories down so your positive stories are higher. I've seen a client recently that we did not work with. One of those phone calls I said that we don't like to take anymore because we don't know the organization. There's an IT company and they really botched a job posting on LinkedIn. It was anyway, it was ugly, and they were flamed for it on social. And now every time they post something, somebody's right there to jump back on their LinkedIn and repost a link to all the older news coverage about this recruiting mistake that they had made. So I can't say that the textbook 3 years is accurate anymore. That's for sure. You really have to find your friends, build your ambassadors, use your employees, use your unions, use anybody you have a good relationship with, and really make sure you're restoring faith in your operations, and use all those organizations as ambassadors to carry your message. It's important after a crisis to debrief. What did we do wrong? What didn't work? What can we learn from this? I can't share or cannot state how powerful that is. All these crises I've worked on, the reason why I feel more confident today than yesterday is because I did something yesterday that prepared me for today. So I think, exposing yourself and really taking advantage of those opportunities to debrief are really important. Okay, how are we doing on time? It's 1:06. I know Nez wanted me to talk about the other side, being on the client side of the crisis, and I will do that. Before I do that, though, I want to make sure any questions on any of those sort of best practices and reality, any of the industries I talked about before that maybe you were curious about, if anybody has any specific questions on those. Nope. Okay, cool. So Common Ground was unfortunately in the news a couple years ago and last year, and I won't go into all the details now just because we don't really have time for it, but and we're not doing shots or drinking alcohol. But I will say this, if you do want to hear the full details, I did a podcast with Ann Smith. Her podcast is called All Shine, No Flash. And so if you, wherever you get your podcasts, look for Ann Smith's podcast. But I sat down with her, and I worked together here in St. Louis years ago at the Standing Partnership, and we are also colleagues in Counselors Academy of PRSA. And I think my relationships through Counselors Academy also are really invaluable. PRSA has been really important to me. But I sat down with Ann and gave her the full scoop. So if you care to hear that, you can go listen to Ann's podcast. But essentially, Common Ground was the victim of fraud and embezzlement. And to put a finer point on it, I co-founded this firm with another person, and she was the minority shareholder, but still an important person here at the firm. And she took advantage, not just of me, but the entire team here for a long time, and was convicted ultimately of multiple counts of wire fraud and was sentenced to prison, and is currently serving her sentence somewhere. So with that said, the issues I talked about earlier come into play for us. So first, it was publicly invisible for quite a while. So, when I discovered it and then working through issues with doing the research, getting the forensic accounting and research done, I had time. What that meant was I had some time. Sometimes in crisis, you do not have time. Sometimes we'll have a client call and say, this is a brewing crisis. Let's get prepared for it in case it breaks through. So that it's crises are not always sudden. Sometimes you do know about them for a while, and you have the opportunity to prepare for them. In our situation, internal communications was really a struggle. That legal advice I talked about before, it was such a good question. Sometimes the lawyers tell you what to do, and sometimes you have to listen to them. And I did not want to listen to them. I wanted very much to be open and tell this team what was happening. And that was by far, as a leader of an organization, the hardest time of it all was knowing something and not being able to be fully honest, because if I was honest, I just couldn't share everything. So it felt dishonest. It felt like I was sitting on information that I know could help, but I just legally was bound by important or for important reasons to not share. So there was an internal struggle with that, I would say. So I definitely understand sometimes you do what lawyers tell you to do and it's not what you want to do. The get it right, back to Warren Buffett's comment about get it right, get it out fast, get it out, and then get it over. Get it right. That's super important. And that certainly was true in our case. I invested quite a bit of time and money in the forensics to make certain from an accounting, a finance, and a legal perspective, there were no questions. This was buttoned up. There would be no doubt at the end of the day, whatever the case was, we were going to know. So getting it right is super important, getting your facts right. And then ultimately, as the case was becoming public and the US attorney let me know that they were going to be making it public, that you have to brace yourself, you know it's going to happen. So again, internal communication is very important, letting the teams know what's going to happen, letting clients know. And that was incredibly painful to not only have to expose it to your most vital asset, your team and your clients, but so necessary. People do not want to hear information, other sources, they want to hear it from you. So more than ever, I understand how a CEO is feeling under that crisis. They don't want, they feel the weight of all those decisions on their shoulders, and they just don't want people to be hurt or see the demise of their organization, or whatever the real threat is. So like I said, we prepped the team, we messaged our clients, our partners, our referral sources. I carried a written statement with me almost everywhere I went for a while, because I didn't know when for sure a reporter was going to call. So I was ready with that, and I was very well aware of the fact that I have put clients in this situation, and that I was feeling their angst at the same time. We got through it. You pay attention, right? Like I talked about the social monitoring and whatever before. My daughters were way into that at the time. They were watching all this media hit all over the country, and calling me or calling stations directly if they got the headline wrong or said something wrong, or one outlet actually confused the titles, and it was CFO, I'm the CEO, and one of the stories said CEO. So they were calling and getting corrections made. So it's an all hands on deck situation, even for a little bitty company like ours that goes through it. And thankfully, because we had earned everybody's trust ahead of time, I think Common Ground has a really good reputation. I think we've worked hard to be good stewards of this profession. We have served on this board. We've been active with the chapter. I've been active nationally. I care about our clients. Our work stands for itself over the years. And without a doubt, that history and that reputation and the quality of the team of people here is what carried us through and didn't let a crisis of this magnitude hurt us significantly over time. So brings it all the way back around to the beginning. Make sure you go under a crisis being an organization that can weather a crisis. So that's kind of everything I had for you guys. What do you have for me? Questions, Nez, anything I left out you wanted me to share?
I want to say thank you. Thank you. I know that was difficult and it was humbling, and I appreciate you sharing the story, sharing your knowledge, of all this crisis communication. I didn't know that you worked for Amico. We'll have to talk about that another time. But then also being very honest about what happened with your organization, with your business, and with your team. And so I understand that was difficult, and it's still close. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for being honest with us. The other thing is, before we go, if y'all have questions, please use the Q&A or the chat. I was asked to make one more announcement. On March 23rd, PRSA Midwest is hosting a webinar called What's Your TikTok Strategy? And you can find that information on the PRSA STL website. The STL chapter and other chapters, we've been sharing opportunities for webinars for the past year or so. I think that will continue. So although our chapter is not directly hosting, you are invited to join that webinar. Again, it's called What's Your TikTok Strategy? It's March 23rd from noon to 1:30. And if you would like to register, you can find that information on the PRSA STL website. So
yeah, it looks like we have one more question.
did you want me to read it, Reagan, or do you want to read it?
Please, feel free.
Okay. Thank you. We're tag teaming y'all, so thanks for being patient with us. So it says, Crystal H, knowing you personally, Denise, when I learned of your own crisis, I immediately thought, I understand this. Denise is so forthright, honest, and willing to believe in the personal spirit. I know she would not be looking for this in someone she believed to be true. Next question, not throwing anyone under the bus, but do you have any suggestions or teaching moments about the current petroleum spill in Edwardsville that we can glean? Ooh, that's a good question.
That is a good one. First of all, thank you, Crystal, for your kind words. You're gonna choke me up here, but I appreciate that very much. So, I actually need to study it. It came up, I was at a news event on Monday morning and I didn't get a chance to fully read about what had happened. So I can't say a lot about it other than, the best thing an organization can do and what they have to do in that situation is, one, you've got to turn off the pipeline. We have to stop the release. And two, then the cleanup. And I know they've already started the cleanup. I did hear yesterday that I understand they're siphoning quite a bit. So they've got the science has to do what it needs to do. They need to siphon, they need to remediate that water as quickly as possible. And I know the science has evolved on that tremendously. I try to break down those oils in water. So hopefully they're able to do that. But then secondly, you have to give serious consideration to what happened. Has it happened before? What's our history on this issue? What's the condition of that part of pipeline? How old is it? And what went wrong? So that you really own how to fix it. If it's new and it's accidental and it's an anomaly, that's one thing. But if it's older infrastructure that should have been repaired or should have been addressed, so that something like this wouldn't happen, that's where they're going to have a harder story to tell, is not, having neglected their own infrastructure. So again, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure what caused that leak, and I'm not sure if a human did it. Like the one I had to work, the pipeline rupture that I worked was a full 100% active refined gasoline pipeline that was ruptured with a farmer using his backhoe. We had some flooding, and so he was trying to protect his farm property. So that was a really bad leak because there was so much pressure, there was so much product in that pipeline, and when he broke it, it was just, until you can get the pipeline turned off, you're going to lose every drop of everything in it. The pressure is just so great. Anyway, so it depends a little bit, but that's going to be the process. Is that they have to own what happened and how they're going to fix it so that it doesn't happen again, but also then remediate to the best that they can.
All right, it's 1:18. It doesn't look like anyone else has any questions. We'll going once, going twice. All right. So Denise, again, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us and your expertise. Thank you to everyone who joined us this afternoon. We do understand some of you had to leave early because you had calls or other responsibilities, and we understand that. So again, thank you. If you have any questions, let us know about, if you have any questions about the chapter, just let us know. We hope to see you at future webinars. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
A comment that says, great program, lots of wisdom and information. Thanks, Denise. I'm clapping for you.
Have a great day, everybody.
Take care, y'all.